Imagine trying to run one of the largest empires in the world without paper, ink, or an alphabetic writing system. No filing cabinets. No printed tax forms. No spreadsheets. Yet across the mountains, deserts, and valleys of the Andes, the Inca Empire managed labor obligations, census information, military organization, and state resources with astonishing reach. One of the tools that made this possible was the quipu, also spelled quipu, a device made from cords and knots. At first glance, a quipu might look like a bundle of strings. But to trained specialists, those strings could hold structured information. Color, cord placement, knot type, and numerical position all worked together to create a portable record. The quipu was not a primitive curiosity. It was a serious information technology built from fiber. A typical quipu was made from cotton or camelid fiber, such as llama or alpaca wool. It usually had a main cord, with many pendant cords hanging from it, and sometimes additional subsidiary cords branching from those. The arrangement was not random. The order of cords could matter. Their colors could separate categories. Their position could identify different groups, places, or types of goods. Knots tied along the cords could represent values. Some quipus were small and simple, while others contained hundreds or even thousands of cords. That range tells us something important. Quipu was flexible. It could record a narrow set of figures, or it could organize large bodies of administrative information. In a landscape where transport and communication were difficult, a lightweight record made of cord was extremely practical. The most clearly understood part of quipu is its numerical system. Inca quipus often used a decimal positional structure, meaning numbers were organized by powers of 10, similar in principle to the way modern decimal notation works. A knot lower on a cord might represent ones, while knots higher up could represent tens, hundreds, or thousands, depending on position. Different knot forms could indicate different numerical functions. This made quipus useful for counting people, animals, crops, labor units, tribute, or stored goods. The brilliance of the system was that it translated abstract numbers into physical placement. Instead of writing digits on a page, information was encoded into the location and form of knots. A trained reader could handle the cords and recover the values stored inside. Quipus did not suddenly appear with the Inca. Objects that can confidently be identified as quipus first appear in the archaeological record during the first millennium CE, and many scholars associate these early examples with the Wari Empire. The Wari were an important Andean civilization long before the Inca rose to power. This matters because it shows that the idea of using cords as records had deep roots in the region. The Inca inherited, expanded, and standardized many Andean practices, and quipu may have been one of them. By the time the Kingdom of Cusco emerged and later developed into the Inca Empire, cord-based record-keeping was already part of a broader Andean information tradition. The Inca turned that tradition into an imperial administrative tool. The Inca Empire, which expanded dramatically between the 15th and early 16th centuries, depended on organization. It stretched across difficult terrain, from high mountain regions to coastal deserts, covering many languages, communities, and ecological zones. To govern such a territory, the state needed reliable information. How many households lived in a district? How much labor could a village provide? Which storehouses contained maize, textiles, or weapons? Which communities owed service, and which had already contributed? Quipus helped answer these questions. They were used in census records, taxation, calendrical tracking, and possibly military logistics. They allowed information to move upward through layers of administration. In that sense, quipu was not just a recording device. It was part of the nervous system of the Inca state. One key reason quipu worked so well was specialization. These records were not necessarily meant for anyone to pick up and understand instantly. The Inca relied on trained experts, often called quipucamayaks, who could create, maintain, and interpret quipus. Their role was comparable to that of accountants, archivists, statisticians, and clerks. A Quipu did more than tie knots. He had to know the categories being recorded, the conventions of the system, and the administrative context behind each chord. This reminds us that information systems are never only about symbols. They also depend on people who know how to use them. Without trained readers, a quipu becomes mysterious. With trained readers, it becomes a precise tool for memory, reporting, and control. The biggest unresolved question is whether quipus recorded only numbers, or whether they could also preserve narrative information. Many surviving quipus clearly encode numerical data, but historical sources suggest that some may have carried more complex meanings. They may have been used to remember events, genealogies, calendars, or simple standardized histories. If that is true, then quipu may have functioned partly like a writing system, though not necessarily in the same way as alphabetic or pictographic scripts. Instead of representing spoken words directly, it may have combined numbers, categories, colors, textures, and established conventions. The difficulty is that we no longer have the full living tradition of interpretation for most ancient quipus. The chords remain, but much of the codebook is missing. Color was one of the most important dimensions of quipu. A chord's color could indicate what kind of thing was being counted or classified. For example, different colors might distinguish categories such as people, animals, crops, or administrative groups. The exact meaning could depend on context, and not every quipu used the same scheme. Beyond color, the direction of spin, the way chords were attached, the sequence of pendants, and the presence of subsidiary chords may all have carried information. This made quipu a multidimensional record. A modern page usually depends on visible marks arranged in lines. A quipu used material properties, fiber, twist, color, knot, order, and spatial relationship. It was information you could see, touch, and hold. When the Spanish conquered the Inca Empire in the 16th century, quipu entered a dangerous new world. European administrators and priests were familiar with alphabetic writing and written legal documents, so they often viewed Andean record-keeping with suspicion. Many quipus were destroyed, especially when they were associated with indigenous religion, memory, or authority. Some were labeled idolatrous. Others disappeared because colonial institutions gradually replaced them with European-style documents. This loss was enormous. If thousands of quipus once existed in administrative centers, storehouses, and communities, only a small fraction survived. Today, known pre-Columbian examples number just under 1,400. That survival count is impressive, but it is also a reminder of how much information was erased. The Spanish response to quipu was not entirely simple, though. Some colonial officials recognized that quipus were useful and tried to adapt them for administration. Some priests even used them for church purposes, especially in communities where chord records were familiar. In certain cases, quipu technology was combined with European writing to create hybrid objects known as quipu boards. These could be used to track religious duties or community obligations. This shows that quipu did not vanish immediately after conquest. It changed under pressure. It was sometimes suppressed, sometimes tolerated, and sometimes folded into colonial systems. The story is not only one of destruction, but also of adaptation, negotiation, and survival in a deeply unequal colonial world. Modern researchers study quipus with a mixture of archaeology, history, mathematics, fiber analysis, and digital modeling. They examine knot placement, chord structure, colors, and relationships between different quipus. Some discoveries suggest that groups of quipus may correspond to administrative records mentioned in colonial documents. Others reveal patterns that look too structured to be accidental. But the challenge remains: without the original readers, interpretation is difficult. It is like finding a database without the software, labels, or user manual. Even so, every surviving quipu is valuable. It can reveal how Andean societies categorized the world, how they governed territory, and how they transformed memory into durable physical form. The knots still speak, even if we only understand part of their language. Quipu matters because it expands our idea of what knowledge can look like. Too often, civilizations are judged by whether they left books, inscriptions, or alphabetic texts. The Andes challenged that assumption. Here was a sophisticated record-keeping tradition that used cords instead of pages and knots instead of ink. It supported imperial administration, preserved community information, and survived in altered forms after conquest. In some modern Andean villages, Quipu-like traditions continue to hold cultural meaning. The deeper lesson is that human societies have invented many ways to store truth, obligation, history, and memory. Quipu is one of the most fascinating, a system where bureaucracy, mathematics, craft, and culture were tied together, quite literally, in knots. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.